Gabon becomes the latest African country to have been taken over through a military coup, with the announcement by military officers they had seized power earlier today in the Central African country. SABC News Correspondent Alex Cadier has more on this developing story. Alex, good evening to you and welcome. This happened almost immediately after the state election body announces a third term in office for Ali Bongo. Pick up the developments from there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's been a really surprising situation. That's what we heard from the EU's top diplomat. The defense ministers of the European Union were meeting in Spain. Josep Borrell, that EU top diplomat, effectively the foreign affairs minister of the European Union, said the situation in Gabon took us all by surprise this morning. And we've seen footage of those military leaders in Gabon in the presidential palace celebrating the coup. We also heard from former French President Hollande, who said, well, this is concerning. It's the fifth coup d'etat in the French-speaking region of Africa since 2020. So that goes in parallel to what Josep Borrell said earlier, which was actually, if it is confirmed as a coup, if the state institutions in Gabon are dissolved, well, that may make instability in the region worse, and that they are monitoring that very closely. He was also asked, well, will you evacuate European nationals? He said, we'll do like we did in Niger, like we would do anywhere else. If our assistance is needed, we will help people get out of the country. But the line for now is monitoring the situation very closely in Europe.
So it's another African nation, as you've mentioned as well, overrun by a military coup. The borders, we understand now, are being closed. And the reasons we are hearing echo that of reasons given in places like Niger. What other facts are available, Alex, on why the military took over?
Well, it's quite limited, but what we've heard is that actually it was in protest, or certainly against Ali Bongo's re-election, and we know that there have been a lot of contestations about that election. It's not been accepted by the international community as necessarily the most transparent or the most above-board election. The Bongo family has been in power in Gabon for more than 50 years, and so there's an element there of pushback from that military effectively having enough of the leadership of Ali Bongo and the Bongo family in Gabon. So that will be the main motivation. There is certainly some element of knock-on effects from what we saw in Niger, and that is the real concern for Europe as well, is looking at that domino effect. We saw the coup in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, of course, in that region. Looking at that instability will be a real concern, and the EU, certainly with Niger, is taking action. It's a little bit different. We heard a slight nuance from the EU's top diplomat earlier. He said, well, in the case of Niger, it was a legitimate election. It was the democratically elected president of Niger being overthrown, and therefore the EU is now thinking about sanctions against those coup leaders in Niger. None of that yet for Gabon. The situation is way too fresh, way too uncertain. So monitoring very closely, but certainly worrying about that domino effect, and Europe ready to take action.
So we saw that message from President Ali Bongo, later begging for noise to be made and, of course, confirming his arrest. His son, who's also a close advisor, and other members of his inner circle have also been arrested. This is a man whose family has ruled the nation for almost 6 decades. What effect has their leadership had on the country's fortunes, at least as seen through the eyes of the Gabonese people?
Well, that's a little bit difficult to look at from a European perspective. It's certainly not been smooth sailing throughout, and certainly if you look at that response from the EU, there's a lot less empathy and a lot less support out of the blocks, actually, from the European leaders. We've seen the French standing by the Gabonese election, but that hasn't been the case across the European Union. And so maybe the plight of the Gabonese people, maybe the Bongo administration has not been as, or certainly isn't as supported in Europe as the presidency in Niger was. So that's, again, it's very easy, certainly coming from a European perspective, to mix things up a bit too much and be a bit muddled. Well, that isn't the case here. These are very, very different cases. Certainly a lot of military pushback from the armed forces in Gabon, and certainly a situation to be monitored very closely.
Yeah, well, just to add on to that, and we reported on this a little bit earlier, that there have been hundreds of people who turned up on the streets of the capital, Libreville, celebrating these developments today following that announcement by the military officers that they had seized power. As you say, Alex, this is a story that is fluid. It's just happened. We're going to see what some of the responses are going to be, but certainly a significant development today. Our SABC News correspondent, Alex Cadier.